Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Crafty Reads. My name is Safa, or welcome if you're new. Today I'm going to be showing you my top 5 reads of 2021. Now, I have read a total about 31 books within this year. Quite a lot, revolutionary record for me, which I'm hugely excited for. And so just to preface, in this video, there will not be major spoilers to the books I mentioned, but in case you haven't read up until that point, I will preface that, there might contain minor spoilers if you have not read, X amount of books in that series. And maybe some trigger warnings and general things about my thoughts and ratings. So let's just get on to the very first book. The very first book I'm going to be talking to you about is The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. Now, this book I rated 4 out of 5 stars. This is book 3 in the From Blood and Ash series, which is a high fantasy romance. So just to preface, if you have not read book 1 of the From Blood and Ash series, which is called From Blood and Ash, I would suggest clicking away because it will contain very, very minor spoilers if you don't know at least that book. And so, following book 2, there was a lot of tension surrounding the cliffhanger, and the way this book led up, it was heartbreaking, so sad. But the plot twist, those revolutionary lineages that became much more apparent in the characters were revealed. We saw so much more relationship development between Poppy and Cass, which was amazing because obviously the first 2 books, we see, just them starting to solidify that foundation that was begun in the first book, and the second book was really cementing that. This book is just building off and getting better from there. And so we see so much more romance between them. It's really cute. We see Poppy has so much more badass moments. I love that. The things she does for the people of Atlantia, and those kind of really big decisions she makes, knowing she's going to be possibly a future ruler of Atlantia. And not to mention some major bomb drops and plot twists with certain characters that we've already been familiar with. And I think coupled together, it just made for a really solid read. The only reason why I didn't give it the full 5 or 4.5 was because at times it felt very slow pacing, because there was a lot of recycled banter and reused conversations that were getting a bit old, and some parts were a little irrelevant or just dragging on too much, and it was just, you could cut out a good chunk of this book, but overall, still a really fun read. Super sad, fun read. And last thing, Castiel is the best person ever. Okay, the next book I'm going to be talking to you about is, let me pull it up, Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. Now, this book is the first book in a new series Stephanie has cultivated, and it's basically a spin-off from the Caraval world. So this is a YA fantasy, possibly trilogy, knowing Stephanie. And the things I just loved about this book, I rated it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really solid. Stephanie is one of my favorite authors, and this was just a huge hit for me. She writes so whimsically, and it's very magical in the way she makes her stories, because it feels like you're reading a fairy tale. And the characters she creates, each of them has this unique, little quirk about them, which makes them really special. And I think the real reason why I picked this up and loved it so much is because of our favorite immortal fate, the Prince of Hearts, Jax. I mean, how can you not love the guy? He is this morally gray, very mysterious, unpredictable person. He's typically the Joker, that person who's a wild card. You can never understand or predict what he's going to do. Just know that he's going to cause a lot of chaos in the plot. And his journey with Evangeline is really strong in this, and I really did like their development in it. Evangeline is our main character, and it doesn't particularly follow Jax's perspective, but he's heavily intertwined in the plot because she makes a deal with him, typically at her expense, but there's this also really unique aspect that Stephanie has made in this book about mysteries and this legend of this thing called the Arch. And so basically, it's rumored that behind this arch, where it's locked away, could be a dungeon to a prison of some sort, a weapons hold, or some kind of treasury. And for some reason, Jax wants to inherit this. He wants to get behind that door. And he's using Evangeline for that benefit. But she's still trying to piece out, like, why is it like that? So that whole mystery aspect of them uncovering more truths about the arch and the legend itself and Jack's affiliation with it is something really, really captivating. It's really fun to read about. And also, forgot to mention, there are mini dragons in this book. That's so cute. Like, the mini dragons is just, like, they're roasting food and everything. Like, you just can't help but love it. And the last thing I just want to mention is that although this is kind of mentioned or prefaced to be like a sort of romancy book, it really isn't. It's more like an enemies to friends, back to enemies type book. And so it's really interesting because you would expect, you know, Jax and Evangeline, they work together. They're going to develop some kind of relationship. But it's hard to say because Jax is the kind of person who doesn't open up to anyone. He's very closed in terms of his past, about what he's done and all these kind of things. But in certain scenes, you see that wall kind of break down slowly, and it allows like a friendship between him and Evangeline to kind of develop, which is really, really nice to see. Okay, the next book on this list is Kingdom of the Cursed by Carrie Maniscalco. Now, I have posted an extensive review on this, so if you want to check that out, hopefully it's linked here, so go check it out. But in general terms, I'm just going to speak about it here too. So this is a 5 out of 5 star read. I hung on to every single word of this book. So following the events of the first series, there was a lot of confusion and just unanswered questions at the end of it, which just really confused the heck out of most readers, especially me. But going into this, Carrie really did answer that and kind of clear the air about what was going on. Other things I really, really liked about this was, you know, that relationship between Wrath and Amelia was taken up a huge notch. Not just like a little bit, like a giant level. And so it blossomed into a new adult romance. So it's spicier. There's a lot more going on. I love the fact that Amelia still has that little interesting quirk about her. How she loves to cook and she makes Wrath food at times, which is really cute. Wrath himself, the cute quirk about him, he loves desserts. And I think some of the interesting plot twists that occur were really like, you know, revolutionary? Is that the word? I don't know. But it really dropped the bomb, especially at the last few chapters at the end of the book. Huge, huge plot changes made to it, especially like hidden identities, about figuring out like the issues with Victoria's murder and figuring out like who was behind it, and all these things were really, really solved. I wouldn't say solved, but they were answered. It became more apparent. But I think what was really, really good about this was the fact that Wrath and Amelia kind of grew independently, and like they kind of learned from each other what works for them and how to kind of balance each other out in these different situations, which is really, really good. And I really did enjoy that. Wrath is also like the sweetest person to her. You'll see why. Highly recommend. But yeah, that's kind of it. The next book on this list is The Silvered Serpents by Roshni Chokshi. Now, this book I rated 4.5 out of 5 stars. Now, this is book 2 in the Gilded Wolves trilogy. And it's YA fantasy. It's a heist-based type story, historical fiction almost, urban fantasy. And so, following the events of the first book, there was a huge major plot twist and like a very upsetting ending that really changed the course of the characters for the rest of the story. And that being said, where this starts, there's huge changes in them, and that literally plays out the entire time, where they're all basically very different in this case because something's missing. I'm not going to say what, it's spoiler free, but they basically travel to Russia in search of this mansion which houses this specific artifact they're looking for. And so what I liked about this one better than the first one is that the location was stagnant in the story, because in the first one it became really confusing in terms of like the magic system and like what was going on, because they were all going off in different directions and places. It just made it so chaotic to read sometimes. But this was so much easier to understand because it was more stagnant in one location. And, you know, all the things were just easily more connected that way. And the magic system was more easier to understand, obviously. I think the real reason I really loved it was the angsty, tension-filled drama romance. Like, the drama, the jealousy type trope is literally the best one to read about, honestly. Like, it's so entertaining, and I was hooked onto this from like end to end, literally. I finished this in a few days. And I think what's interesting about this, what made it more interesting, is the fact that there was this kind of revelation about the certain character made where it was like time was running out for them, and so it was a race against the clock to find this artifact, basically. And so when knowing that, it puts pressure on these characters to, work faster, work harder, search more quicker. And so because of that pressure put on them, you see them do a lot more flashier decisions and more interesting things done in the plot, which made it more interesting to read about because they're all making mistakes, they're going crazy, you see the bantering going on. It's just a lot of fun to read. And I think also what was really important about this is the huge character development we see in the characters, specifically two people, in which you see one of them start to kind of grow a backbone more. They learn from their past mistakes and they grow stronger as an individual to support their friends and, stick up for themselves. While the other person, you see more of their ulterior motives kind of become apparent and at play, which is something not everyone, particularly likes. The fifth and final book I'm going to be discussing to you today is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. Now, this is interesting. If you didn't know, this is book 5 in the ACOTAR series. It is a adult fantasy romance, I think. And I'm going to preface, if you have not read A Court of Wings and Ruin, which is the third ACOTAR book, I would suggest maybe clicking away from this. I mean, you don't need to read the novella, which is Frost and Starlight, to really hear me out in this, but I would suggest at least read up until the third book. So the thing is about this book, we start off knowing Nesta, it's about her. Nesta's really awful to people. 90% of the population hates her at this point because she's really rude, she's nasty, but it's really all because she's dealing with this trauma and inner turmoil with herself after the aftermath of the war. So following those events, it really sets up the tone for this literally being a book about Nesta's character arc and her development. And I have to say, this is the easiest 5-star rating, or one of the easiest 5 stars I had to give, because the character development was so well done. It was probably the best I've ever read of any character in any story. And that's because Nesta in this book is very relatable in a sense where, her trauma and the things she's dealing with internally, she doesn't specifically voice it to other people or express it how she's feeling, which leads to issues of her developing alcoholism, abuse with like drugs and all these other things. It's just really harmful to her mental health and her physical health. And so she's put this situation with Cassian to train and kind of overcome these hurdles and get stronger as an individual personally and mentally. And you see that really apparent. Although it is a little slow pacing at times, I felt like it was well deserved because of the point of trying to show her development over time. It's not going to be a fast process, it's slow. I think some of the other things I really, really enjoyed was the fact that Nesta herself wasn't just in it to kind of fix herself. She wanted other people to be able to benefit from her situation as well. By benefit from her situation, I mean the training aspect. Oh yeah, I think one of the most wholesome parts of this book was seeing Nesta kind of make her own inner circle, her own friend group, and that's Gwen and Amiri. Gwen and Amiri are, two different fae who also have their own, past traumas and issues of their own that they're trying to overcome. But it's interesting because, although they all, 3 of them have like their own issues to deal with individually, they come together and are able to comfortably express themselves and the way they feel, and also have fun at the same time because they're such good friends, and they grow together, both physically, mentally, and like psychologically, everything. And the trials they went on together, it's just so strong. It's really beautifully written. Highly, highly recommend. So that's kind of it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out the other videos I posted, and like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one. See ya. Bye.
It's paradise. Won't you take my advice? Nothing's half as nice as June. It's paradise. Won't you take my advice?